How are you?
Doing good. It's good to be back, man.
I was thinking about this last night that the last time I saw you, you were here for Star Wars. And
Wow.
how is promoting a film that is as personal as this one compared to promoting a big old blockbuster and with its own set of pressures as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's more intense because you got to do more press, basically. Um, but also, I mean, I guess uh, yeah, I guess there's a kind of personal connection to work like this, which kind of makes it scarier in a way, even though it's more daunting to do more interviews with those bigger movies. Um, you do a project like this, you tell a story that's as personal as this, you do feel kind of vulnerable and exposed. You feel like people have read your diary or something. So there's that element of it. And we said that when, people say they connect to something like this, it means that much more.
Tell me a little bit about how this film came to you.
Well, I struck up a friendship with Bassam Tariq, my co-writer and a director of this movie, when I was in New York shooting The Night Of. And incredible documentary filmmaker Omar Malik, who Bassam had worked with on a movie, introduced us. Omar's from Wembley. And so I go and meet Bassam, and he's a butcher. He's in his butchery, just taking a meat cleaver to like beef ribs.
This is literal. This is. I thought you were talking about his editing style or something like that. No, he is. I'm not. I'm serious. I was like, oh, is this like, okay, well, why not?
No, he's literally a butcher.
Right.
He's got a butchery called Honest Chops in like the Lower East Side. And I was like, this guy's kind of interesting. He's not like most directors you meet. And we were from very similar backgrounds. You could tell we were both kind of driven by, but also struggling with this idea of like, home and how our work, so much of our work is inspired by home and fueled by home, but was also in some way maybe kind of prevented by home. That also home was somewhere we were driven to want to kind of like run away from. Um, this push and pull between you and home, between family, how you can't live with them, can't live without them. And we kind of found each other and kind of became chosen family and became very close. And as we talked about what should our collaboration be, what should it look like, at one point we went to Pakistan to do research there, and we realized actually we've got to start with home, we've got to start with ourselves. And we're both people who sometimes are forced to wear the burden of representation for our communities, and we realize actually we don't want to represent anyone, we just want to present ourselves. And you know what, the one kind of story we don't get to tell, or character I don't get to play, is us. It's people literally like us, and we thought that would be maybe kind of bold and kind of interesting thing to explore.
How does Zed's character, who is this, this man who has found great success abroad, and a really meaningful moment in the film, early in the film, is told, you talk so much about where you're from, but when was the last time you were there? How much does his story rhyme with your own?
I mean, it's massively, my relationship with my parents, I'd say, is a lot better than Zed's. With his, we kind of created that father character as a metaphor and a symbol for that kind of Zed's inability to accept himself really, and understand that, like it or not, he's part of a larger whole. But there's a lot that kind of draws from mine and Bassam's experience and the experience of people around us. But then after that, it takes a life of its own and it starts to take flight, particularly under Bassam Tariq's lens, which is infused with this magical realism. If you watch his short film Ghosts of Sugarland on Netflix, or if you see this film, or next up he's doing Blade, there's always a sense of a heightened reality and a magic that runs throughout his work. And it's interesting because, I remember we walked around the Islamic art collection at the Met Museum in New York and said, how can we draw from this heritage, and create a visual language that's as hybrid as our experience, that's as infused with spirituality and magical realism as our experience. And he really found that language. And once he found that style, it meant that it went beyond autofiction and autobiography and started to morph into something much more fantastical and took on its own life.
Well, what I find interesting about that is that, elements that we would call, magic realism or more abstract parts of the film, in some ways they are more adept at getting to truth than simple narrative is, if you know what I mean.
Oh, I mean, yeah, because they come from the subconscious, they come from the dream space, they come from the non-linear kind of brain. Um, so the emotional part of the brain doesn't work in a linear way, you know. And Bassam would come up with these crazy dream sequences, like, okay, he wakes up, he's in Quran class, and he's reading the Quran, and then the Quran teacher starts like fighting him in a kind of mud wrestling match. I'm like, what? He's like, no, I just feel it's right. And I was like, all right, you're the genius. I'm following you. We did it, and you kind of watch that scene back, and it's like the whole film is encapsulated in that scene. It's a reluctant embrace that you need. You know, it's like I need a hug. I need to know that the place I'm from accepts me, loves for me, roots for me. But as soon as you hug me, I feel trapped and claustrophobic and I've got to escape. And it's a wrestling match with a Quran teacher in their underpants in the middle of a Quran school in a basement. It comes out of nowhere. And where it comes out of is Bassam and mine, you know, psyche, but Zed's, the characters. So yeah, I think there is a kind of truth that those surreal sequences can get to, and also just kind of fun.
In terms of the things you have to wrestle with, I guess one of the things that this film made me think about was the idea of inheritance. The things that you might be wrestling with are things that are passed down to you, whether they be a cultural tradition, a religious tradition, an expectation from family, or in a literal sense in this film, what can be passed down to you is a genetic disorder or an autoimmune disorder. How did making this film make you think about the tension of what we inherit and what we have?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. As I said, so much of this film is about that push and pull. You know, your roots are the thing that grew you, that inspired you, and yet they're always in danger of pulling you back into the dirt. You know, so there is that tug of war between Zed and his inheritance. Um, you know, for Zed, I think, and also I think for many of us, particularly through the pandemic, um, we're going through this realization that individualism is a lie. We're not individuals. We're all part of a larger whole. Like it or not, we're a link in a chain. Our well-being is interdependent. And it's interesting because, you know, this film is in many ways a pandemic movie. You know, it's like a sudden health crisis forces a workaholic to go into a kind of lockdown where he's forced to sit with himself without his identity and the things he thought gave him meaning and reassess what really matters. That's what so many of us have been going through during the pandemic. And when he goes on that journey, what he realizes is that yes, he is a link in a chain. He is a descendant, but he's also an ancestor. And it's not about him ultimately. You know, this creating from a place of ego, living for yourself, for your immortality. It's like, yes, we will all be immortal, but in a way that kind of erases the us from it. You know, all our molecules are there in the water cycle, and your gene code is in the next generation. And what you do will either create more space or restrict the space for the next generation. And so the film looks at that in many different levels, from like musical inheritance, going from Qawwali to hip hop to like kind of, you know, this like new mumble rap kind of vibe in the next generation of rappers, as well as, yeah, this autoimmune condition. And really the autoimmune condition is, in the movie, is an identity crisis played out on a molecular level. You know, it's your body doesn't recognize itself. It doesn't accept you. You don't accept yourself. So it's attacking itself.
How was your own, now that everything is gone, who am I during this pandemic?
It was intense, but I feel like I just went through it with Mogul Mowgli just before it happened. So I was like, I've been here before. I'm in a kind of lockdown without this seems familiar. You know, it was interesting. It was really challenging, actually. I realized how much of a workaholic I am, how
You
much
are.
I'm always like a shark, like a perpetual motion to like, otherwise I feel like I can't breathe. It was good in that it forced me to slow down. It was sad in that, you know, I lost a couple of family members and so many people lost so much.
I'm so sorry.
No, thanks. And it's, you know, I think there's a kind of spiritual reckoning taking place. You know, I don't know, on some level, the planet is, I mean, factually, I think the UN's come up with a report, hasn't it, that like viruses and diseases that have jumped over from animals to humans are increasing in frequency. And that's because we're taking up, you know, their habitats and disrupting their ecosystems. And it's like that the planet is kind of forcing us all to just time out in some kind of way. So you know, you got to take that time out and sit with the demons that it confronts you with.
If you're just joining us, my guest is Riz Ahmed. We're talking about his new film, Mogul Mowgli. But I'd like to just change tack for a second and talk about a report that came out in June called Missing and Maligned, The Reality of Muslims in Popular Global Movies by the USC Annenberg Inclusion Initiative. And it was with support from you as well. I know that I had a look at the report, and it's quite broad, and I'll ask you to do something kind of challenging here. But like, what were the key takeaways from that report for you?
All right, here I go. Here's my attempt to do this. So,
okay.
Let me tell you a little bit where it came from. I was the first Muslim actor to be nominated for Best Actor at the Oscars. And I thought, that's, wow, awesome. But then I thought, oh, that's ridiculous and weird. Muslims are a quarter of the world's population. And I know there's like a couple of us, myself, Mahershala, Kumail, Aziz, a few people that are like more visible out there. But I feel like there's only a handful, and it's weird. I feel like we're still invisible, and being the first and having that dubious accolade kind of made me want to dig a bit deeper. So we dug deeper, partnered with the University of Southern California, and they did a big study. And it turns out that of the top 200 films of the last few years, Muslims are only 1.6% of speaking roles. And that's when they're a quarter of the world's population. What makes it worse is that over 90% of films don't have any Muslim characters whatsoever. But then when you do have Muslim characters, this tiny number of them, 3/4 of the time they're portrayed as either perpetrators of or victims of violence.
This is within the 1.6.
Yeah, so this is like pretty scary stuff. And you know, it does have a real world impact. This is a matter of life and death. You know, the perceptions that we create in our culture legitimize discriminatory laws. They fuel hate crimes. They sanction the invasion of foreign countries. You know, and the death and the disruption that comes from that. I mean, the Department of Homeland Security has run tests on public opinion and kind of biased portrayals and the effects that it has. It's a real thing. You know, propaganda works. And we've been living in this area of this last 20 years and actually going way beyond that for almost 100 years of really demonizing and villainizing or rendering invisible Muslims, quarter of the world's population. And we need to do better because, yeah, lives are at stake and dreams are left unfulfilled and awesome stories aren't being told that we'd all enjoy.
What emotions did you feel when you got the report back?
You know, weirdly, I was shocked, but I wasn't surprised
at
all. You know, it was like, okay, so we're not imagining this. This is real. And you can't change anything until you measure it. So being able to measure it was powerful. And we've had some really constructive conversations with streamers and networks and studios and agencies, just putting this on their radar because there's such a kind of blind spot that's developed around this. Even a movie like Black Panther, which I loved, I stepped away from it and I realized, hang on a minute, Muslims are only in that movie for one moment, and it's to kidnap schoolgirls as terrorists. Or like a show like The Boys, which I loved. It's like you got half man, half fish. You've got every different race under the sun. Muslims turn up at one moment to hijack a plane and you're the supervillain terror. It's like autopilot at this point, you know, how othered we are. And it's not okay. It's just straight up racist. We'd call it out as such for any other minority, but it seems to be this kind of acceptable kind of racism. And you can see why when, you know, the American president won an election off the back of it not long ago.
And I don't want to put the burden of fixing anything on you, but what reactions have you seen from contemporaries of yours who are Muslim, who are in film and television? And what reactions to this report have you seen from people in Hollywood?
You know, people have been really supportive. You know, it's had a lot of traction. As I said, people in the industry, they want to do right. I think first it's pointing out that there is a problem. Then it's saying, well, how do we help? How do we fix it together? And we have to fix it together. You know, having a couple of successful exceptions to the rule will not change the rule. And so having a couple of visible examples of Muslim success is not what we're after. We need new structures in place. We need new execs, decision makers, but we also need a talent pipeline. And one of the things that we're creating is my company, Left Handed Films, in conjunction with the Pillars Fund, which is an amazing nonprofit dealing with culture change and funding grassroots Muslim organizations, is the Pillars Artist Fellowship, and it's kind of like a Muslim MacArthur grant. It's unrestricted cash, $25,000 to a select handful of emerging Muslim filmmakers. It's mentorship, industry guidance, how to navigate, and connecting them with people that can help them get their work made and on the air. And what we're talking about is new pathways, new pipelines.
There's a version of this story where through your own work alone, you try to, make films that buck against this, we'll say, racist trend that's outlined and racist bias that's outlined in this report. But the path we're presented with is that you are doing that within your own work, and you are also advocating largely for work outside of your own. Where in you does that advocacy come from? If you know what I mean.
I mean, it's probably a mix of things. I think if I'm going to be just really honest, I think it's like, that's a lot to put on a couple of people, right? It's like, hey, can other people get involved in, join this party? Can we help fix this together? I've been trying to, make films and tell stories and make music that kind of bucks against some of these toxic dominant narratives for 15 years. Like, that's not going to change anything on its own. Like, no one person can change anything. Not a handful of people can. We need to all join hands and just decide together, like, over time, that this kind of thing's not okay. It costs lives, and we're gonna make a change together. So I think change is only really possible in a collective sense. I think it's quite pragmatic in a way.
Maybe this is a good way to close things off. I couldn't help but see a couple of parallels between Sound of Metal and this film, and both have to do with a loss of artistic ability, and then in some ways how that relates to a loss of purpose. When we lose our ability to make art or make things, what are we then left with? Those are two films, Riz, where you are also an artist and you have to embody that conflict. I have to imagine that in some way it must have changed you in how you relate to your own art.
That's really what drew me to both these projects, what building Mogul Mowgli and then also taking on Sound of Metal. I was at a crossroads in my own journey where I'd done a lot of these bigger studio films and had a blast doing them and loved it and was so grateful for the opportunity. And yet kind of wanted to reconnect to really why I started doing this. And it wasn't for a round of applause. It wasn't for it wasn't for really anyone else but myself in a weird way. It was therapy. It was catharsis. It was unpicking the knot in my stomach, getting that thing off my chest, kind of finding a way to exhale that volcano that I felt like I was sitting on for so much of my life, and particularly my adolescence. And I guess I realized that, I've spent a lot of my life and a lot of my career wearing masks, either code switching between cultures and classes growing up, or literally as an actor, where you have to leave yourself at the door and play someone else. Particularly as an actor who doesn't fit the traditional mold, you have to develop quite a range because you're asked to play everything except yourself. And I realized that if this first half of my career had been about, putting on masks, learning how to mold masks intricately, then this next half had to be about taking them off. And both Sound of Metal and Mogul Mowgli, I think I put more of myself into the work than before. And I think I used those projects to kind of, to wrestle with similar themes in my own life. Are you hiding behind your work? Are you using your work to try and get stuff? Or are you using your work to name your pain, and in doing so healing yourself and others? Are you using it to take off masks? Are you using it to let go of things rather than get things? And committing to these projects that were so immersive and took so long to build and make, and each in their own way, it was the only way I thought I'm going to really learn this lesson in my life. is if I put it into my work.
And did you?
Nah. We're still working on that. Yeah.
Well, you know what I mean. Like, I guess I'm in my own journey. I'm trying to remember that not getting to the summit sometimes, but working towards it is enough. Do you know what I mean?
It's not just enough, it's the thing. Like, none of us is getting to the summit. None of us. We're all running a relay race. You pass it on. And that's what, my greatest hope for Mogul Mowgli is it inspires and enables another generation of filmmakers to talk about their experience that they thought, and they thought they couldn't before. We're all just doing a section of the journey. None of us is going all the way home.
Well, this is a very powerful baton you made here, Riz.
Oh, thank you, man. I'm so glad you connected with it. It's such a personal film. It's almost like makes me cringe that like people are watching it, but it feels good to know people have connected.
Pleasure to talk to you again, and hopefully it won't be as long next time. Nice to see you.
Much love. Take care, man. Thanks.
I've been speaking with actor, writer, and producer Riz Ahmed. His new film, Mogul Mowgli, is out on September 3rd.